Hi everyone, Suzanne here. I hope you're all well and welcome to Sew Custom. Today's video is going to be how I made this quick and easy little cami top. So if you're interested in seeing that, then let's get started.
Starting with the fabric, I'm using this sequin mesh for the outer and this stretch lining for the lining. And on to the cutting out. So I just have two pattern pieces for this top, the front and the back, and I've went ahead and cut out my sequin fabric there, and I need to do the same thing for my lining. So that's both my front and back lining cut out. Both of those pieces are on the fold for both the outer fabric and the lining. And now on to the construction. So I'm just lining up my front with my back at the shoulder seams on both the outer fabric and the lining, and to the sewing machine. So I'm stitching at my 1 centimeter seam allowance, back stitching at the start and the end, and that's how that looks. And I just want to clean up that edge. So the sequin fabric at the edge is a little bit jagged and I don't want it plucking my lining fabric. So I'm just using a little bit of that lining fabric, folding it over the edge, enclosing that entire raw edge and then stitching it down. So I've done that on both sides and trimmed off any excess. So that's how it looks from the outside. I've given it a nice press. And now on to the neckline. So I've made myself a little bit of piping here. So it's just a bit of bias tape with some piping cord that's ran through the center, and I've just run that through my overlocker to make it. On one end I've left a little bit of the bias tape on the outside a little bit longer than the piping itself. I've pinned that to the center of the neck at the back, and now I'm ready to stitch that in place. And to make it a little bit easier, I'm using my zipper foot, and I've lined up my needle right on the edge of the piping, and I'm stitching at my seam allowance the whole way around. So back stitching at the start, leaving that little bit of a gap of the bias tape at the start. You'll see why in a second. Trying to be as accurate as I can be. I'm going relatively slowly here. And then at the end I have some excess piping which I'm going to trim down, and then unfold that extra little bit of bias tape, pop the piping inside and run my last few stitches over the top to enclose it. So that's how that looks. And I just want to trim off the excess sequin fabric. So I've went ahead and done that here on both my neckline and my armholes. I'm not too worried about the edge of the sequin affecting my lining fabric here because the edge of the piping will cover that. So that's nice and neat. And now onto the lining. So I'm just pinning my lining to my outer fabric at the shoulder seams, right sides together. And I'm going to stitch the whole way around the neckline. Again, I'm using my zipper foot here just to help me be as accurate as I can be. So I'm lining my needle up with the piping and stitching the whole way around, again at my 1 centimeter seam allowance. And again, I'm going relatively slowly here, trying to be as accurate as I can be the whole way around. Back stitching at the start and the end. So that's how that looks. So from the inside and the outside. So my lining is all attached. My piping is just sitting along the edge of my outer fabric. I've given it a nice press here. Super neat and tidy. So now I'm ready to deal with the armholes. So I want to join the lining to the outer fabric at the armholes. Currently, both of my fabrics are wrong sides together. I need them to be right sides together in order to sew them. So I've just rolled up one side of my bodice to the shoulder seam, flipped my lining fabric out from underneath and line them up now right sides together. Pin them in place, and now stitching here in exactly the same way as I did the neckline. So I've lined my needle up just on the edge of the piping. I'm sewing at my 1 centimetre seam allowance, and I've backstitched at the start. I'm going to backstitch here at the end, and that's one of my armholes done. So I've just trimmed down that lining fabric, and now I'm ready to pull the whole thing right side out. So I'm just gently pulling through my lining and my outer fabric through the shoulder. So that's one side all nice and clean. Now for the other. And I'm showing it here again just because this can be a little bit tricky. So I'm just folding one side of my bodice to the shoulder seam. I'm holding on to my outer fabric, flipping my lining fabric in underneath, and then lining up my outer fabric with that. So one side of my bodice is all nicely rolled up inside the shoulder. I've went ahead and stitched that in exactly the same way as I did the other side, and now just to pull it through. So that is both of my armholes nicely enclosed with my lining attached. So it just needs a little bit of a press, and that's how it looks from the outside. So again, at the neck I've got the piping running right along the edge. I've got exactly the same thing at both of my armholes. Everything's nicely enclosed, nice and neat on the inside. And now to deal with the side seams. So I'm just lining up my outer fabric right sides together and my lining fabric right sides together, pinning on both sides, ready to stitch. And stitching here at my 1 centimetre seam allowance, starting at the lining and going the whole way down to the outer fabric at the hem. Backstitching at the start and the end. So that's how that looks. And now I want to do exactly the same thing here as I did on the shoulder seams, and that is enclose that raw edge. So again, I've just cut a little strip of the lining fabric. I've just folded it over the edge of the sequin fabric, and I'm just stitching right in the center the whole way down. So that's how that looks. And now to trim off the excess. And I've done exactly the same thing in terms of enclosing that raw edge on the hem as well. So now the last thing I have to do is to close up the hem. So I'm just folding up my lining to meet my outer fabric right sides together at the hem, and now pulling that whole thing through to the outside, repositioning my pin, and now I'm going to pin the whole way around. So I've went ahead and done that here, and I'm going to stitch from one side to the other, leaving a little bit of a gap, probably only about 3 or 4 inches. That will help me to pull everything through. And once it's all done, that's how it looks. And there's my little gap. And now to pull it all through to the right side. So that's my little gap that I just need to finish off with some hand stitching. So I've tied a knot in my thread, and I'm just running some very quick whip stitches along that 3 or 4 inches. Tying a knot at the end. One last little press, and this is how my little sequin cami top looks when it's complete. So I've got my piping around the neck and the armholes. The whole inside is completely enclosed with lining. nice and neat inside and out. And this is how it looks on. So as you've just seen, this is a super quick and super easy little make. That lining fabric on the inside makes it really nice and comfortable against the skin. I've paired it up here with just some standard tailor trousers and a little tuxedo jacket, and I love this entire look, and with the sequin fabric of the top it makes it really lovely sort of occasion wear. Love this one.
So I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, please do, and I shall see you guys in my next one. Bye folks!